As unrest continues following Belarus's presidential elections, the EU has held an emergency meeting on what to do about the protests and subsequent response by the country's President Alexander Lukashenko. With calls made and sanctions recommended, what happens next? How will the EU or Russia, who have both called for each other not to intervene, react? And what about the United States, whose sudden shift towards the EU's position? Joining me now to discuss all these questions and more are Russian defense analyst Pavel Falkenhauer, Fraser Cameron, director of the EU Asia Center in Brussels, and Professor Joseph Mahoney and Professor Zhang Xin from East China Normal University. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan. Professor Mahoney, why don't I go to you first? We saw protests erupting in Belarus after Alexander Lukashenko securing a sixth term by landslide. What are the protesters protesting against? I mean, what are their demands?
Well, you know, I think the basic question is everything we look at now in terms of politics has to be looked through the lens of COVID-19. And Belarus, like a lot of countries in the world, has struggled. Lukashenko took kind of a folksy, dismissive attitude towards COVID-19 initially. And you know, this has come on top of long-term structural challenges in terms of his economic policies and his domestic policies. So I think people are frustrated. I think they're feeling increased pressure from COVID-19. And I think everyone is kind of looking forward to a future when Lukashenko won't be the leader. What comes next? And given what we're seeing with the movements by the United States moving NATO troops into Poland, this is a double game of what's happening domestically, the disappointment there, and what's coming down the line. And so as people struggle to work through these uncertain times and these difficult times, it's had a broader destabilizing effect on both the domestic and the international political situation for Belarus.
Well, Fraser, if we have you with us, Fraser, what's your take? I mean, some call this election rigged. Do you look at it that way?
Yes, I think most international observers and governments basically said that the elections were neither free nor fair. I mean, the idea that Lukashenko could win over 80% of the vote when you look at the demonstrations is absurd, and I think he probably realizes that now. I think the question is, you know, it's important for the major powers to keep out, to try and let the people of Belarus to resolve this themselves. The EU has taken a very measured decision yesterday in terms of limited sanctions, offering to mediate and providing some financial assistance, including victims of COVID-19 and also the NGOs. So I think it's important to calm down, try and let the Belarus people sort this out and ensure that this is done in a non-violent way. That's the message from the international community, including Russia, as far as I can see.
Pavel, what is Russia thinking about all of this? I mean, what are Russia's positions and perspectives? Pavel, are you with us?
Well, the Russian position is rather complicated. Yes, I'm with you. Do you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, the Russian position is rather complicated. Well, Russia doesn't like kind of so-called colored revolutions. Russia is very suspicious of the Belarusian opposition, that they would move Belarus away from Russia and closer to the European Union and to the West. At the same time, Moscow doesn't like Lukashenko at all. There has been a lot of bad experience working for a long time with Lukashenko. He basically refused to follow on the agreement to form a union state. And so Russia would want Lukashenko to go too, but they don't want to see the kind of Western opposition taking over at the same time in Minsk. So right now, Russia is kind of neutral, but in a very edgy position, because allowing Belarus to go away and not severed, just simply make relations with Russia less close than they are, at least on paper right now, well, that's not really acceptable.
Right. Let's talk about another issue, a phenomenon that is Lukashenko's main rival, 37-year-old stay-at-home mother and a political novelist who, gained quite some support over there in Belarus. Let me ask you, Fraser, why do you think, she could pose a challenge to Europe's longest-serving leader?
Well, obviously the frustration of the people was evident, and when her husband was arrested, she reluctantly was thrown into the position of being the sort of opposition figure. And surprisingly, people united around her and two other females, so it was like a triumvirate of females who actually captured the imagination and quite clearly got most votes. And of course, as I said earlier, the vote was rigged. So I think Lukashenko now has to really decide cracking down is not going to actually lead anywhere, will bring further demonstrations. The EU has suggested a National Council of Reconciliation with Lukashenko, and we have to give that a chance, because if not, there's a problem that Belarus might descend into chaos.
Well, I want you to listen to what the European Union Council President has said on all this. Let's play this thought.
These elections were neither free nor fair and did not meet international standards. We don't recognize the results presented by the Belarus authorities. The people of Belarus deserve better. They deserve the democratic right to choose their leaders and shape their future. We stand firmly behind the right of the Belarusian people to determine their own fate, and the EU will impose shortly sanctions on a substantial number of individuals responsible for violence, repression, and election fraud.
Well, Pavel, in Moscow, let me ask you this. We heard about the EU threatening sanctions against individuals in Belarus, but previously Moscow warned the EU, warned actually France and Germany not to intervene. So how do you think Moscow will respond to these EU statements and sanctions?
Well, Moscow has already said that they don't believe that this is the right move, that the outside powers should stay out. Of course, at the same time, it's well understood that these sanctions are basically superficial. These are against some individuals and Lukashenko maybe himself. They will not, they are symbolic kind of slap on the wrists for the regime in Minsk. And, but Moscow is anyway emphasizing that you should not get involved, because if you get involved, then Russia is going to get involved, then everything is going to go worse. So keep out of Belarus. Belarus is part of the union state with Russia, at least on paper, and that means it's a kind of a Russian, it's seen in Moscow as essentially a Russian domain. And so European Union should keep its distance, absolutely.
Well, Joseph, where does the United States stand on this, on this Belarus situation? Does Washington right now really care about what's happening over there?
You know, I think the bottom line is the people who care the most about this, other than the Belarusian people themselves, and you know, Russia clearly in terms of its strategic vulnerabilities on the border, the people who are most concerned are Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, and concerns about checking Russian power in that region. That said, in the case of the United States, in the case of Western Europe, I agree that there's not a real strong desire to punish or to pursue Lukashenko. It's not that they wanted the status quo. The status quo is going away one form or another. But I think what you're seeing in the United States is you know, more sensitivity in the Trump administration, firstly towards leaning towards Eastern Europe over the last several years against some of the Western European powers, but also concerns in the Trump administration with the U.S. election. If the U.S. doesn't come out and take at least some position, then Trump may be susceptible to claims from the Biden camp that he's once again pandering to Putin, or that he doesn't really care about fair elections or democracy. But again, there's also this issue that with the repositioning of NATO into Poland, and with the idea that Lukashenko is going down sooner or later, there's clearly a need to start positioning. So I think that's what we're seeing.
Fraser, do you see more unity or more division between the EU and the U.S. on the current Belarus situation, and how the situation might evolve?
I think the EU is more in the lead on this. I don't think the US at the moment is particularly interested in Belarus. It's a side issue, and it won't become big in the campaign. The EU and its member states, they're direct neighbors, so they have to be involved. And I think the United States is perfectly happy for the EU to take the lead on this at the moment. But neither is thinking of any sort of major intervention. It's more a question of trying to bring about a peaceful resolution of this. And ultimately, Lukashenko will have to go. That's quite clear. How he does go, that's the bigger question.
Pavel, does Lukashenko have to go? Pavel in Moscow.
Well, it seems it's going to be hard for him to kind of stick on, though he will. He already said that he will leave post only if he's dead. And I don't know, I mean, he most likely believes he has nowhere to go, or he believes that he can weather this storm as he did many others. I mean, he's been there for 26 years and survived a lot. So he's going to be sticking around, and this means that there is a serious potential that the present not very good situation could deteriorate. There could be an escalation of confrontation in Belarus. There can be a more or less breakdown of government there. And that's a very dangerous situation. It's going to be dangerous for the entire region, for Europe actually, because the only feasible scenario of Russia really massively intervening inside Belarus, maybe using force, is if the situation there gets out of hand, if there's a breakdown of government, and Russia would believe that there's an imminent threat of Belarus moving away out of the Russian sphere of influence, out of the Russian domain, away and becoming a kind of second Latvia or something, a pro-Western country, or actually almost not so far from Moscow physically. Then Russia could intervene. That's the only trigger that could lead to a Russian intervention, and then it's going to be a really bad thing for everyone around, including, of course, the Belarusian people first and foremost.
Joseph, do you agree with what Pavel has said?
I think there's another possibility, and I think this possibility is indicated by two factors. The first is Europe has said that Lukashenko needs to be part of the conversation, and Lukashenko has shown himself, whatever his faults and failures, and they're considerable, but he's shown himself over his long term in power to be a very adept politician at playing different sides. So we may see a solution where he finds some sort of way to share power with the opposition. It's a little incredible at this moment to imagine. But the opposition, the people of Belarus, also understand that they don't want a Ukraine-like situation. I don't think that they're aiming necessarily in the direction of a color revolution. The political philosophical term that most corresponds, I think, with the situation in Belarus is what Camus called the politics of the absurd. I think everyone's aware of that. So through the absurd, we may find an absurd solution where there's some sort of way that Lukashenko can share power, and there may be a way to sort of transition forward to the future in that way.
Yeah, talking about color revolution, protests in Belarus right now is certainly evoking memories of the Ukraine crisis in 2014. Fraser, will Belarus be another Ukraine?
I think that the Europeans are very worried about similar situation developing as are the people in Belarus. I don't think this is an old-fashioned color revolution. I think they simply want, like most people, a prosperous life and better job opportunities. It's not as if there's a great desire to join the EU or NATO here. So I think essentially we have to create the conditions whereby Lukashenko can either step down or go away, but he simply can't be part of the scene for much longer. If you look at the workers, I mean, he went to speak to his core supporters yesterday and they booed him. It reminded me Ceausescu in the last days of his reign in Romania. So I think time is up for him, and the question is how to ease him up. And I think he probably recognizes this now and is looking for a way out.
Pavel, does this remind you of the Ukraine crisis in 2014 at all?
There are some similarities, but basically these are totally different countries, Belarus and Ukraine. Belarus is a much smaller country and it's very homogeneous. It's not really, there is some differences between the West and East, but they are not as obvious and serious as between East and West in Ukraine, which were pulling in totally different directions. Ukraine was always a split country. Belarus tends to be not split, to be kind of, they see themselves and understand themselves as a nation. And that means internal strife most likely will not be as bad there as it ever has been in Ukraine. And the Belarusians hope that they can some kind of way wiggle out from under Lukashenko and at the same time not provoke Moscow to take any kind of drastic moves, and that things may come out rather good. Actually, in Moscow, they also hope that that will happen. Moscow doesn't want Lukashenko. Moscow wants Lukashenko to go and be replaced with a much more amicable leader or leadership in Minsk, which is going to go along with Russia. Basically, what Russia wants strategically is moving on with the integration of Belarus with Russia into a joint union state. The problem is that the Belarusian public doesn't want that at all, no matter who's going to be there at tops. I mean, what the opposition and Lukashenko basically agree on, that they don't want to be in one state with Russia. And that's the big problem, that Russian strategic interest does not really correspond to the Belarusian society as a whole. And that could be a source of a very serious confrontation. Hopefully, this could be avoided, and that if there's going to be it's going to be maybe left to discussions and not to military or police action, but this is the real basic problem. It's not so much Lukashenko or not Lukashenko, it's where Belarus goes, where Russia wants it to go, or where the Belarusians want to go themselves. And there's a big discrepancy there, and a very dangerous one.
Yeah, it could very well be. Joseph, let's talk about U.S. EU relations. Considering Trump administration not only criticized the EU NATO members and has also enacted sanctions on some EU member states, is the alliance between the bloc, the EU, and the U.S. Eroding? Will positive U.S.-EU relations be salvageable in any ways?
You know, I think things are really shifting in strange ways. I think we have to say that the United States has always had kind of an underlying tension with the EU, in so much as the EU tried to build up both a trade zone as well as a currency that would be able to push back against U.S. hegemony, the dollar hegemony, and U.S. economic power. And we know that Trump, for example, came out very, very strongly in support of Brexit, which, of course, was undermining the EU project. And Trump has also had a lot of, I don't want to use the word animosity, but that's the word that comes firstly to mind, with respect to Germany, with Merkel, and what have you. And he's cultivated close ties with some of the Central and Eastern European powers that have been very hostile at times towards Germany. So all of this has been, and then to add to that what we've already said, recently pulling the NATO troops out of Germany and repositioning in Poland, and trying to push EU to reposition or rethink NATO in terms of a China containment strategy. All of these things are in flux and dynamic at a time when COVID has made things even more complicated. So, and on top of this, we don't really know who's going to be president in this country, in the United States next year, and whether or not we're going to see a significant shift, whether or not we'll see in Biden a much more friendly position towards the EU, or if it'll continue the United States' longstanding suspicion that even goes back before Trump towards the EU. So all of it's rather complicated right now, and it contributes again to what I called the broader context of this politics of the absurd, and it's very hard for us to try to predict and to really feel out each person's position or each country's position in this time.
Right. Professor Zhang Xin from East China Normal University, thank you for joining us. How do you look at this Belarusian election? You know, basically the West is calling it rigged. The Belarusian President-elect Lukashenko is saying that the West has undermined the elections. How do you look at all these competing claims?
At this stage, unfortunately, we might not know the real results, conclusively, the real results of the national presidential elections, unfortunately. And there seem to be political forces against a simple recount of the votes, both from the President Lukashenko's side and from the current opposition side. So sociologists are using different methodology to try to gauge the real convincing results of the presidential elections. But unfortunately, given the evidence we know, the results very likely is there's no conclusive winner, given the structure or the institutional setup of the election. So as to the West, mostly I think from EU was a much strong, straightforward official statement of how they do not recognize the presidential election results in Belarus. I would say it's, at this stage, it's a little bit dangerous to jump into this domestic disputes of Belarus and to send such a strong message. It potentially can complicate the situation on the ground very much. So I personally would advise against all external parties, whether it's EU, whether it's Russia, whether it's the United States or any other external actors, not to get involved at this stage.
But let's face it, Professor Zhang, Belarus is located in a very strategically important location. It used to be the sphere of influence for Russia, and now, you know, the EU has been trying to get a hold on it. The United States has been trying to get on good terms with the EU. How do you look at, you know, the balance of power over there regarding Belarus and in particular this election?
What you said is generally right. Belarus traditionally is located in this sensitive, tricky location between Russia and Europe. It's involved in some sort of a geopolitical combat for some time. But again, I would advise against any easy interpretation of ongoing political crisis within Belarus through this geopolitical combat, the lens of geopolitical combat. Relative to Ukrainian crisis, 2013-2014, one good thing, if I may use the word good in quotation mark, one good thing of the current political crisis is neither Lukashenko nor the opposition party have openly resorted to this strong nationalistic, divisive narrative or refer to this geopolitical combat narrative to frame the current crisis, at least up until now. So what you said, that the geopolitical division, potential geopolitical gain factor is definitely part of the story, but so far it hasn't been a key part of this domestic Belarusian political crisis yet. And I would again advise against any simple interpretation.
Yeah, let me ask our friend in Russia, Pavel, if you're still with us. How do you think the situation in Belarus will evolve with the protests and also a strong sitting president?
Well, it seems right now that both sides have kind of dug in their heels. The opposition formed the coordination committee. Lukashenko is refusing to have negotiations with them. There is industrial action happening in different Belarusian factories, political strikes here and there. It seems that we're in for a rather long haul of kind of tug war between the opposition and the Belarusian president and his security forces. Right now, the security forces, which after the election were very active suppressing the opposition, now they're not doing that. At the same time, Lukashenko has been touting that the West is massing forces on his border. There's a threat of invasion, which is not really real, but that means he's kind of saying that he may turn to Moscow and get Moscow involved. So right now there's going to be a continued standoff, and there's a potential of further escalation.
Joseph, do you look at that way too? There's a potential for further escalation?
I think there is, but you know, we keep referencing the color revolutions in Ukraine, and I think a more direct parallel, although it's a little further afield, are the Jasmine revolutions that came after the instability following the global financial crisis in 2008. I think what we're seeing right now worldwide is wherever you have these states that are in that were already sort of, or these governments that were already in vulnerable positions, you're going to be seeing these vulnerabilities really exploited by the current context. And I think everyone, Russia clearly through its experience in Syria, the United States and its experience in Libya, everyone is kind of on their toes right now, because in this moment of instability, in this moment of global strategic repositioning, everyone has to mind their interest. Of course, you know, we keep talking about all these big players, and as our friend in Moscow says, the people who are most concerned about this are the Belarusians themselves. And I think for their sake, I hope that this is resolved peacefully, although it is a moment fraught with danger.
Professor Zhang, sorry, we have about 30 seconds left. Your thoughts on the way out for Belarus and the Belarusians?
I think there's some very positive sign where society is in Belarus is better organized over time, and also most of the social organization refers to, relatively speaking, nonviolent approaches, unlike what we saw in Ukraine a few years ago. So that gives me some hope that a relatively safe, peaceful, negotiated transition could be on the road too, even though escalation is also a theoretical possibility. I hope those people with power would realize there are different opinions within the society, and these voices need to be heard, need to be properly addressed through a mediated, institutionalized way. I hope things will go smoothly in a peaceful way towards a peaceful transition.
Sure, sure. That's the hope of many. Professor Zhang, thank you so much. I also want to thank our friend in Moscow, Pavel, and Joseph Mahoney in Tennessee. Thank you all so very much. And that will do it for this edition of Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Thank you for watching.